Nova Scotia, late October 1889. The harbor at Dunmore Cove had gone gray and cold, the way it always did when the season turned and the fishing boats came home for the last time before winter locked the straits. The MacAllister Cannery stood at the end of the long dock, brick walls black with salt spray. Windows lit amber. Through the dusk it had employed half the town for 30 years, and the man who owned it had not smiled in 4 of them. Callum MacAllister ran the place the way he ran everything. Precisely, quietly, and without complaint. Every ledger balanced, every worker paid on time, every barrel inspected before it left the dock. The men respected him. The women pitied him, though none said so to his face. He was 41 years old and looked like a man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that feeling things too deeply was a luxury the coast could not afford. His wife, Clara, had died 4 winters ago. Fever in the end, though the year before that had taken her slowly in other ways. He had held her hand until the morning she stopped knowing his name. After that, Dunmore Cove got a cannery owner who arrived before sunrise and left after dark, and the house on the ridge above the harbor got a man who sat by the window most evenings and watched the water until it disappeared into night. His housekeeper, Mrs. Beaton, set his supper at 6 and his breakfast at 5:30, and pretended not to notice that the second chair at his kitchen table had not been pulled out in years. She was a stout woman with iron-gray hair and the practical kindness of someone who had lived long enough to know that some grief didn't want words. "Wind's shifting," she said one evening, clearing his untouched plate. "Storm coming in off the Atlantic." "Likely," Callum said, not looking up from the shipping manifest on the table. She paused at the door. "You ought to sleep before it hits. The dock crew will need you early." "I know my dock, Mrs. Beaton." She left without another word, but the look she gave the back of his head was the same look she had been giving it for 4 years. Something between patience and sorrow. Outside, the wind moved through the spruce trees on the ridge, bending them toward shore. The harbor light turned slowly below, sweeping the dark water in long yellow arcs. Callum watched it from his chair, the manifest forgotten. The light had been the same since before he was born. There was comfort in that, of a bleak and reliable kind. He had learned to make do with bleak and reliable. He did not know, that night, that the next morning would change the shape of everything. The storm arrived before dawn. By the time Callum reached the cannery at 5:30, rain was driving sideways across the dock and the harbor was white with chop. He stood in the doorway and watched his crew tie down the smaller boats, his oilskin pulled tight, the cold finding every gap. He almost missed the boy. He was sitting on an overturned crate at the far end of the dock, just beyond the circle of the cannery lamp. 8 years old, perhaps, or small for 9. His coat was soaked through, his boots muddy past the laces, and he was holding something pressed against his chest with both hands the way children hold things they have been told not to lose. Callum walked toward him. The boy looked up. He had dark eyes and the kind of stillness in his face that did not belong to a child who was simply lost. "You're not from here," Callum said. "No, sir." The boy's voice was steady, though his jaw was tight with cold. "I came on the coastal steamer." "From Pictou alone?" The boy hesitated. "My aunt put me on the boat. She said to find Dunmore Cove and ask for Mr. MacAllister at the cannery." Callum crouched so he was level with the boy. Rain dripped from the brim of his cap. "I'm MacAllister." The boy looked at him a long moment, measuring something. Then he uncurled his fingers from whatever he was holding. It was a small tin brooch, oval, the kind of modest jewelry that working women wore on their Sunday collars. The enamel had been worn thin, but the design was still visible. A sprig of white heather set against dark blue. "My mother has one like it," Callum said slowly. He had not meant to say that aloud. He reached for the brooch. The boy let him take it. On the back, scratched faintly into the tin in the careful hand of someone who wrote letters slowly and meant every one of them. "CL to CM Dunmore Cove, 1883. The air left Callum's chest. "CL, Clara Levesque." her initials before she became Clara MacAllister. He had given her that brooch the year before their wedding, pressed into her hand on the wharf at Antigonish the morning he sailed south. He had forgotten he'd had the initials scratched in, or perhaps he had always known and had simply buried the memory under 4 years of not letting himself remember small things. "Where did your mother get this?" he asked. The boy straightened. "She said it was hers. She said the name on the back would tell me where to go." Callum's hand tightened around the brooch. He looked at the boy again, really looked. Dark eyes, yes, but also a particular set to the chin. A way of holding the gaze without flinching. "What is your mother's name?" he asked, and his voice came out lower than he intended. "Nora," the boy said. "Nora Levesque. She said she used to be someone else, but she couldn't always remember who." They went inside. Mrs. Beaton appeared from nowhere, as she always did when something important was happening, and had the boy wrapped in a wool blanket and seated near the Cannery stove, before Callum had finished removing his oilskin. She set a mug of tea on the crate beside him and looked at Callum over the boy's head, with an expression he could not fully read. The boy's name was Felix. "Felix Levesque," he said, because his mother's name was Levesque, and he had never known his father's. His mother lived with her sister in Pictou, had lived there for 3 years, had been there before that in a place he didn't know the name of, had been sick for a long time, had only recently begun to remember things clearly enough to speak about them. "What sort of sick?" Callum asked carefully. Felix looked at the steam rising from his mug. "She fell," he said. "That's what Aunt Rosalie says. A bad fall in the winter. She was confused for a long time after, forgot things, people's names, her own name sometimes." He paused, but she started remembering. "Not everything, but enough to tell you to come here." "Yes, sir." Felix looked up. "She said to find you. She said you were the kind of man who would not turn a child away." Mrs. Beaton made a small sound at the back of her throat that she turned immediately into a cough. Callum stood very still. Outside, the storm hammered the dock, and the harbor light swept on in its slow, indifferent arc. "Did she give you anything else?" he asked. "Anything with more writing on it?" Felix reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. The fold was soft with handling, as though it had been opened and closed many times. He handed it to Callum without reading it himself, which told Callum that either the boy had already memorized its contents or understood it was not his to keep. Callum unfolded it. The handwriting was uneven, not the way an educated woman's hand was uneven from haste, but the way a recovering woman's hand was uneven from effort. Each letter pressed deliberately, as though reclaimed from somewhere far away. "Callum, I do not know how much of this is true and how much is my own mind filling in the gaps. But I remember the brooch, I remember the name on the back, I remember a harbor with a long dock and spruce trees on the ridge. I remember, most of all, a man who was patient with me when I did not deserve patience. If I am wrong, forgive me and send Felix home. If I am right, please do not leave him waiting in the cold." He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully along its worn creases and put it in his breast pocket. "Felix," he said, "your mother, is she well enough to travel?" The boy considered this as seriously as an adult would. "Aunt Rosalie says she's stronger than she looks," he said. "She said that's always been true." Callum almost smiled. "How far is Pictou?" "Half a day by steamer, less if the weather's good." Callum looked at Mrs. Beaton. She looked back at him with the studied blankness she deployed whenever she was trying not to tell him what to do. "Prepare the room," he said quietly. "The one with the east window, and get the boy fed." Mrs. Beaton straightened like a woman who had been waiting 4 years for those exact words. "Yes, Miss MacAllister." Directly. He could not go immediately. There were 2 days of work he could not postpone. A shipment due in from Halifax, a dispute between 2 crew foremen that had been simmering since September. He dealt with them methodically, the way he dealt with everything. But something had shifted beneath the surface of his days. He caught himself standing at the cannery window, staring at the water. He caught himself reading the letter a third time at his desk. After dark, the lamp burning low, the house very quiet around him. Mrs. Beaton left a pot of tea outside his study door at 9 o'clock and did not comment on the light under the door when she passed it at 11. On the third morning, he told his foreman, a broad-shouldered man named Duncan who had worked the docks before Callum's father died, that he would be away 2 days, possibly 3. Duncan looked at him. "Everything all right, sir? I have something to see to in Pictou." "Right then." Duncan turned back to the manifest, then stopped. "Mr. MacAllister." "Yes, whatever you're going to see to. I hope it's the kind of news you can bring home." Callum looked at him a moment. "So do I, Duncan." He told Felix to stay with Mrs. Beaton, who had by that point developed such complete authority over the boy that Felix had stopped questioning anything she asked of him. She fed him well, gave him a room of his own, taught him to play cribbage on the second evening, and asked him nothing more about his mother than he wished to share. What she told Callum the night before he left was brief. She had found him in the hallway outside the boy's room, standing in the dark listening to the sound of Felix's quiet breathing through the door. "She sent him a long way," Mrs. Beaton said softly. "She did. That takes something." "Yes," Callum said. "It does." Mrs. Beaton adjusted the candle in her hand. "The boy has her faith in him, you can tell. Whatever she is, whatever she's been through, she raised him brave." Callum said nothing. He looked at the closed door a moment longer, then turned toward the stairs. The steamer to Pictou left at 7 in the morning. The storm had blown itself out, leaving the coast washed clean and cold under a high white sky. Callum stood at the rail and watched Nova Scotia slide past. The dark headlands, the scrub spruce, the small white houses set back from shore roads that ran nowhere in particular. He knew every inlet between Dunmore Cove and the Strait. He had sailed this coast since he was Felix's age. It had never felt this long. Pictou was a working town, modest and sensible, with a harbor smaller than Dunmore's and a main street that smelled of lumber and salt. He had the address from Felix, written in the boy's own hand on the back of the coastal steamer schedule. 14 Church Hill Road, Aunt Rosalie's house, the blue one. He found it without difficulty. It was blue, as promised. A narrow house on a steep street, a kitchen garden put to bed for the winter, a spruce wreath still on the door from Thanksgiving. He stood at the gate for a moment longer than he needed to. He knocked. The woman who answered was not Nora. She was perhaps 50, with a strong, practical face and eyes that measured him before he had spoken a word. She stepped back from the door. "Mr. MacAllister," she said. It was not a question. "You expected me. We hoped for you." She opened the door wider. "I'm Rosalie Dubreuil. Felix is Nora's boy. Come in." The house was warm, smelling of wood smoke and bread and the faint medicinal sharpness of dried herbs. Rosalie led him through a narrow hall and stopped at a door at the back of the house. "I should tell you," she said, her voice dropping, "that she has good days and difficult days. Yesterday was good. This morning, when I told her you might be coming, she was clear. More clear than I've seen her in months." She paused. "She knows who she is. She knows who you are. But the time between then and now is still broken in places. There are gaps she may never fill." "I understand," Callum said. Rosalie studied him a moment. "You came all the same." "I came all the same," he said. She opened the door. The room had a low ceiling and a braided rug on the floor, and a window that looked out onto the bare kitchen garden. Nora was sitting in a wooden chair by that window, a wool shawl around her shoulders, her hands folded in her lap. She was thinner than he remembered, and her hair was shorter. He would learn later that Rosalie had cut it when she first arrived, tangled and matted from weeks in the bush. But her face was the same. Older, yes, quieter, but the same. She heard the door and turned. For a moment she did not move. Her eyes went across his face the way a person reads something important, carefully from the beginning. "Callum," she said. Her voice was low and careful, as though she was testing the name, making sure it still fit. "Nora." He moved to the chair across from hers and sat down. He did not reach for her hands. He waited. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I came the same day I could." She looked at her folded hands. "I wasn't sure I had the right to send Felix, to ask anything." "He's a good boy," Callum said. "He sat in the rain and waited for me. He was patient. He learned that from having to be." She said it without self-pity, which made it harder to hear. "I couldn't always. I wasn't always." She stopped, started again. "There was a long time when I didn't know your name. I knew the harbor. I knew the smell of spruce and salt water. I knew a kind of light, but not the name to put to it." She touched the collar of her shawl. "Then I found the brooch in the lining of my coat, and something came back. Not all at once, a little at a time." Callum reached into his breast pocket and laid the letter on the arm of her chair. She looked at it. "You kept it," she said. "From the moment I read it." She was quiet a long moment. Sighed. "A gull called once and was gone." "I know there are things I owe you," she said. "Things I can't explain. The fire. I don't know why I walked away from the road. I don't know how long I walked before someone found me. Rosalie says it was weeks before I spoke a full sentence." She looked up at him. "I know you believed I was dead." "For 3 years," he said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," he said. "Be here." He paused. "Can you be here?" She held his gaze. Her eyes were the same. That clear gray-green, the color of the strait in May, the color he had looked for in every stretch of water for 3 years without knowing what he was looking for. "I want to try," she said. "I don't have everything back. I may never, but I want to try." Callum was quiet for a moment. The clock on the mantel measured the silence, patient and unhurried. "There's a room at the house," he said at last, "with an east window. Mrs. Beaton has already made it up." Something shifted in Nora's face. Not quite a smile, but the shape before a smile, the moment a person understands they are not as alone as they feared. "East window," she said softly. "Best light in the morning," he said. "I always liked mornings." "I know," he said. "I remember." They left 2 days later, after the doctor came and looked her over and declared her fit for the journey. Rosalie packed a small trunk and stood on the front step with her arms crossed in the way of women who have given a long time to a task and are quietly glad to see it completed. "You look after yourself," she told Nora. "And you write." "I'll write," Nora said. Rosalie looked at Callum. "And you, don't let her work herself before she's ready." "I wouldn't dare," Callum said. Rosalie made a sound that might have been agreement, might have been a warning, and went back inside. The coastal steamer left at noon. The day was bright and cold. The strait blue-green and lively with wind. Nora stood at the rail with her shawl pulled close, watching the coast of Pictou grow small. Callum stood beside her, close but not crowding, giving her the space that a person needed to find their footing in a new situation. After a while she said, "Tell me about the Cannery. What do you want to know?" "Everything," she said. "Tell me what I missed." So he told her. 3 years of tides and shipments and difficult winters, and one very stubborn foreman, and a summer when the mackerel ran late and they nearly missed the contract with Halifax. He told it plainly, the way he would have told it to her 4 years ago, sitting at the kitchen table before the lamp burned down. She listened the same way she always had, with her full attention, asking small questions at the right moments, not filling the silence when it was better empty. When he finished, she said, "That's a good deal of mackerel." "It was a difficult summer," he said. She almost smiled. "You managed." "I had to." The water flashed in the afternoon light. A tern wheeled overhead and dove. "Did anyone look after you?" she asked. "Besides Mrs. Beaton." "Mrs. Beaton was sufficient," he said. "She always was." Nora looked at the horizon. "I thought about her. When things were unclear. I thought about her potato soup. Isn't that strange? Not the house, not the harbor. The soup. It's good soup," Callum said. This time she did smile, small and sideways. "Yes," she said. "It is." Dunmore Cove came into view in the late afternoon, the Cannery first, then the long dock, then the houses climbing the ridge, and finally the house itself, its windows going amber in the last of the daylight. Nora stood very still at the rail. "There it is," Callum said. "Yes," she said. "I knew it would look like that." I could see it when I tried to remember. But seeing it now, she stopped. It's all right to take a moment. I'm not going to fall apart, she said, with a sharpness that was entirely familiar and entirely welcome. I know you're not, he said. Felix was on the dock before the steamer had finished tying up. He had spotted them from the Cannery window, apparently, and run the length of the dock without a coat, which would have drawn a sharp word from his mother in any other moment. But when she came down the gangplank and he ran the last 10 yards and stopped an arm's length away, suddenly uncertain now that the moment was real, she simply opened her arms. He walked into them. She held him for a long time. Callum stood on the dock with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the harbor light, beginning its slow evening turn. Duncan appeared from the cannery, took one look at the scene on the dock, and quietly turned back around. Mrs. Beaton came down from the house with a lantern, walking quickly for a woman of her build. She stopped when she saw them. Her mouth did a complicated series of things. Well, she said finally, to no one in particular. Well, the house smelled of wood smoke and bread, and the cedar chest she had kept her winter things in. Nora stopped in the hallway, one hand on the doorframe, taking inventory of the familiar by sense alone. The same wallpaper, the same clock, with the same small chip on the left corner of its case, the same slant of light across the floor from the parlor window, now replaced by the warm glow of the lamp. You kept it the same, she said. I didn't see a reason to change it, Callum said, though both of them understood there had been other reasons, ones he would not name. Mrs. Beaton appeared with a tray before either of them had removed their coats. Supper in 20 minutes, she said. Felix, come here and help me carry in the bread. Felix went, glancing back over his shoulder at his mother, as though not quite trusting the world to hold still when he wasn't watching. Nora saw it, and her expression did something quiet and painful and then settled into something steadier. Callum hung her coat on the hook by the door. She watched him do it. That's my hook, she said. It has been, he said, the whole time. She looked at him a moment, then turned toward the parlor. He followed. The fire was lit. The chairs were the same chairs. The second chair had been pulled out from the table, Callum noticed, for the first time in 4 years. Mrs. Beaton's quiet announcement that the order of things had changed. Nora sat down. Felix appeared in the doorway, leaning on the frame the way boys do, when they are pretending not to be relieved, and Callum sat across from her, and Mrs. Beaton set down the tray and stepped back and let the room be what it was. I may not remember everything, Nora said, looking at her hands, then at Callum, then at Felix in the doorway. I want to say that, once clearly, so we don't have to keep approaching it carefully. There are things I can't give back. Time I can't explain. I can't fill in all the gaps. Felix said, That's all right, Mama. I'll remind you of the parts I know. Mrs. Beaton turned toward the kitchen with some speed. Callum looked at the fire a moment. We'll manage the rest as it comes, he said. Nora looked at him steadily. Then she reached across the small table between their chairs, palm up, not asking for anything, offering. He put his hand in hers. Morning came in gray and soft, the harbor wrapped in low cloud, the spruce trees still. From the kitchen, the smell of coffee and the sound of Mrs. Beaton at the stove. From upstairs, the small thumps and shuffles of a boy getting himself dressed in a cold room. Callum came down the hall and stopped at the parlor door. Nora was sitting by the east window with a cup of tea, watching the harbor light go out as the dawn replaced it. She had found, somewhere, an old shawl she used to keep on the hook by the back door. Her hair was loose. The morning made her look like someone returned from a long distance, which was exactly what she was. She heard him and turned. You were right, she said. About what? The east window. She looked back at the harbor, best light in the morning. He moved to stand beside her. Below, the dock crew was beginning to arrive, figures moving through the low mist in ones and twos. Duncan's voice carried up faintly, steady and unhurried as it always was. The mackerel will run early this year, Callum said. Duncan thinks so. Does he trust the mackerel or the weather? Both, He says they agree. Nora considered this. Then I'd believe him. Felix appeared in the doorway, coat half buttoned, boots in one hand. He looked at them standing together at the window, the harbor below, the light coming in across the water. "Is it always like this?" he asked. Callum looked at Nora. She looked at the harbor. "It will be," she said. And the morning came on, the way mornings do, steady and ordinary and completely without mercy for anything that had come before, which is perhaps what morning is for.